Afternoon, everyone. I'm David Eady. I lead industry engagement for the Ray C. Anderson Center for Sustainable Business within the Scheller College of Business at Georgia Tech. And want to welcome you all to this webinar, which is part of Georgia Tech's SDG Action and Awareness Week, as well as part of a series of webinars that we are doing in as part of the Drawdown Georgia Business Compact. And so please do join me in welcoming Connie Hensler and Liz Monet with Interface, who are going to share their approach to corporate carbon accounting. Founded by Ray C. Anderson, Interface is a leader in setting aggressive sustainability targets and reducing emissions. So we are very pleased to have Connie and Liz join us. If you do have questions, please use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen, and we will be monitoring those questions as we go along. So I'm going to introduce our two speakers and then pass it over to them to get started. And I'll start with Connie. Connie Hensler is Global Director of Environmental Management and Product Stewardship at Interface. Connie has a BS in Biology and MS in Applied and Environmental Microbiology from Georgia State University. And Liz Monet is Director of Global Sustainability at Interface. And Liz is a triple jacket, having obtained her undergraduate, master's, and PhD degrees in engineering from Georgia Tech. So again, welcome to you both, and I will pass it over to Connie.
Okay, thank you so much for the introduction, and thank you to everyone to be here today to listen to us. Liz and I are here today to talk about carbon accounting at Interface. I will talk about, Interface's results and progress that we've made, and then Liz will dive into the details of credible corporate carbon accounting. As David said, I'm the Director of Environmental Management and Product Stewardship here at Interface, and I've been with Interface for 29 years, and I've been lucky to have witnessed our transformation from just a carpet company to a company on a mission to reverse climate change. I think probably most of you already know who Interface is, so I'll just very briefly introduce us. Interface is a global flooring company with manufacturing sites in Australia, the US, Northern Ireland, the Netherlands, China, and Germany. And we were founded in 1974, and we're headquartered in Atlanta, Georgia. Perhaps most of you already know the Interface story, but to really know Interface, you have to know about our founder, Ray Anderson, and about our mission. Back in 1994, Ray had an environmental epiphany. He recognized the damage that business causes to the environment, and he called it his spear in the chest moment, when he understood that this company that he was so proud of creating was actually causing damage to the earth. And he set the entire company on a new course, a mission to eliminate that negative impact. And it wasn't just a mission for us to reach zero impact, but also to show others what was possible. He became an early superstar in the sustainability movement. And if you don't already know about Ray and Interface, you want to learn more, I suggest these resources. Ray's books, Mid-Course Correction, and also Confessions of a Radical Industrialist, or the new award-winning independent film called Beyond Zero. Now, I could spend all my time telling you the Interface story because it's one of my favorite topics, but today we want to tell you about carbon accounting at Interface, our progress, our methodology, and the state of carbon accounting today. Measuring environmental impact. So we started with ecometrics. It's our measurement system that's designed to quantify the metabolism of our operations. In other words, how much we take in terms of materials and energy, how much we make in terms of product, and how much we waste in terms of waste and emissions. But today we're here to talk about this one, carbon, and how we account for it. In 2000, we started using life cycle assessment, LCA, when we realized there was really a need to quantitatively measure and track our progress on climbing what we used to call Mount Sustainability. And LCA does that. It quantifies potential environmental impacts across the entire life cycle of our products. And it's an accounting method that considers all of the inputs and emissions from a process, everything that goes in, everything that comes out. Of course, it's a product has many sub-processes, and it includes all of these processes upstream in the supply chain and downstream. The balance of all those inputs and outputs is then characterized into this potential environmental impact. And LCA provides many different environmental impacts like contribution to acid rain, smog, ozone depletion. But the topic for today is global warming potential, also known as the carbon footprint. It's important that LCA be done correctly and ethically to ensure that requires several things. Working with a certified LCA practitioner, an LCA CP, adhering to the most recent and most rigorous standards, and having the work third-party verified. In the early days of this methodology was only guided by what was then the ISO 1440 and 1444 standards. They're really broad in scope about life cycle assessment, and the standards that are not regulate because it's a voluntary standard, but the standards that guide the measurement of carbon footprints have been steadily becoming more specific and more rigorous over time. Still using life cycle assessment. All right, so now I'm just going to touch on our progress. So overall, how have we been doing? These are the carbon footprints of our main products, our main flooring products. Carpet tile, rubber flooring, and LVT. Now, as you can see, the majority of our footprint is in our raw materials and production. Measuring the full life cycle carbon emissions of our products really has helped us to focus on what do we need to reduce and how might we reduce it. Here's some of our progress. This shows our global carpet product carbon footprint trend over the last 15 years. It's important to understand that these values are cradle to gate footprint, what's sometimes called embodied carbon. That is the emissions from the extraction of the raw materials, like drilling for oil or mining for minerals, through the conversion to raw materials, transport to our site, plus our manufacturing processes, energy and waste. So how have we accomplished these reductions? Through many different actions, but some of the key ones include conversion from virgin petro-based materials to recycled and bio-based ones, conversion to renewable energy at our factories, and dematerialization and waste reduction. More recently, we've gone beyond that. We've developed products with carbon footprints that are below zero. We introduced them in 2020, and we call them Sequest. These products actually store more carbon than emitted from cradle to gate. Now, 2022 was the first full year of implementation of the products. And when we complete the assessment for 2022 next month, we're going to see the effect of this new development on that trend chart. So I'm excited to see the real effect of this new step change. Now we're busy trying to convert all of our products into carbon negative ones. And then, of course, we'll still need to address those life cycle impacts downstream, the use and end of life. So that's a summary of how we measure a broad stroke of what we're measuring at Interface and what some of our progress is. And now I'm just going to pass it over to Liz to go into the more details about carbon accounting.
Great. All right. So I'm going to
stop sharing.
Switch over to my slides. All right. Boot this up real quick. Okay. So how do all of these impacts add up when it comes to our carbon accounting and reporting? We collect our data from our scope 1 and 2 carbon emissions related to manufacturing, leased spaces, and such as offices and showrooms, our company vehicles, and our refrigerant recharges. So we capture the manufacturing emissions from our utility bills, probably as many others of you do. And for our leased facilities, oftentimes we don't have those utility bills. Instead, in that case, we have to calculate our carbon based on energy intensity factors and based on the size of the space, so the square footage of that space.
Hey, Liz,
Yes?
I'm not seeing your slides on the screen yet.
Oh, no. Oh, no. I was sure
There
they
we
were
go.
showing.
There we go.
All right. All right, now you're seeing it full screen, right?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Okay, great. So yeah, now you can see what those emissions look like here. So we have our manufacturing sites, our offices and showrooms, and then getting to our company cars, we collect things through Concur and fuel cards to account for the usage of fuel for those vehicles. It's relatively small. Additionally, we work with all of our manufacturing sites to get their refrigerant recharge usage and then estimate that for our leased spaces as well. So just quickly, you can see that last year, our scope 1 and 2 was a little bit over 14,000 metric tons. A lot of that sitting, it's about 50-50, a little bit, 40-60, depending on the year. But that's what our scope 1 and 2 looks like. So as we dive into the much more complicated scope 3, for most of us at least, we see that most of our emissions do sit within scope 3. It's about 97%. And most of those emissions, about 44% of those come from our raw materials. So that's what Connie was talking about earlier in terms of our life cycle assessment, where our raw materials are extracted. Those make up a very significant portion of our overall greenhouse gas inventory. That sits within the purchased goods and services category, category 1. Additionally, that downstream piece, which is harder for us to control, about 30% of our impact is from the use of sold goods. So that comes from things like, you vacuum your carpet or maintain your LVT. Those fit within use of sold goods. And then where we get this data from is really a collection of several sources. Most of it within the scope 3 sphere comes from our life cycle assessment data. So that plays very heavily into this overall impact. We also are getting better data, financial data for our capital goods and purchase services this year. So we're making improvements as we speak on how we measure that. And we also look to Concur and travel agencies to measure our business travel, for example. And this year we conducted our first employee commuting survey so that we could have better data behind our employee commuting category. Okay. So breaking that down into these more specific numbers, like I said, scope 3 is 97% of our total emissions. And we do report on all applicable categories for interface. So you can see all of those here. It's really categories 1 through 12, noting that category 8, our upstream leased assets, is included within our scope 1 and 2. But all of those other categories are applicable to us, and we do report on those on an annual basis. So breaking it down to see where the LCA data really fits in, that Connie presented on, we have our purchased goods, our fuel and energy related activities, our upstream transportation and distribution, waste generated in operations from our manufacturing. We for our offices and general purpose, we estimate based on cost. But for manufacturing, we use the LCA data. And downstream transportation and distribution, our processing of sold product, our use of sold product, and end of life. So just looking at how that fits into all of these categories, it's clear that life cycle assessment is a driving factor on how we're able to communicate and measure our scope 3 with a high level of accuracy. So I wanted to share some of our work on being carbon neutral. So we've done significant work throughout these years that Connie discussed to really reduce our impact, and that has allowed us to get to the point where we can be carbon neutral. This all started with our carbon neutral floors program, and that started in 2005. We started purchasing carbon offsets, and in 2018, we actually announced that it would cover all flooring that we sold. So because we've been able to reduce our impact so significantly, we were able to then afford to go out there and purchase offsets to really reduce our overall impact as a business. And so this is how we look at offsets, I would say. So we have our carbon footprint. We have that measured. That's where we started. And then over time, we've worked to reduce those emissions, but we still aren't level. So once we've done those two things, and we're continuing to reduce over time, we do balance that with our carbon offsets that we look to, and we ensure that they're high quality as much as we can, that they're real, they're beyond business as usual. And so that way we can ensure that the footprint that we are having on the world is reduced, and that overall our impact is 0. So what that looks like for us is we started with carbon neutral products, or what we call carbon neutral floors. And we found that, as you can see in that LCA, we were covering cradle to grave, and that's actually 85%, about 85% of our total greenhouse gas inventory. So this past year, we announced that we would be a carbon neutral enterprise. And so what that meant was the additional 15% of the impact that comes from things like business travel and employee commuting that aren't a part of the actual product that we sell, but are a part of how we do business. We also cover that now so that we can be, every interaction you have with us is carbon neutral. And then the way that we look to certify this, we do certify our greenhouse gas emissions to the GHG protocol. And then for our carbon neutrality, we look to this leading standard called PAS 2060. It's the one internationally recognized standard currently out there. And as a part of this, you have to assess your emissions, as we do with our greenhouse gas inventory. You have to show over time that you're continuing to reduce. So you need a plan, and you need to take action on that plan and report on it on an annual basis. Then additionally, to get to carbon neutral, you offset any emissions that you haven't been able to reduce, and document and verify that. And so we are also involved in keeping an eye on what new standards are out there. So we know that there is an ISO standard 14068 for carbon neutrality, and we're participating in the development of that standard. So, you know, while some complain that the standards aren't perfect, climate change isn't waiting for us to get those measurements perfect. But what we can do is continue to make progress and not wait and let perfection be the enemy of the good. So our commitment looking into the future, we're a carbon neutral enterprise now, and that brings us one step closer to our commitment to be a carbon negative enterprise in 2040. We are third-party certified, or excuse me, our science-based target approach has been certified. So we are committed to science-based targets, and they are approved. And then we're continuing to reduce our carbon footprint through innovation. And step by step, as we eliminate, we're also looking to purchase offsets in the near term until we can get our actual impacts to zero without the need for offsets. So lastly, this is sort of our roadmap. Carbon neutral floors is where we started on this part of our carbon neutral journey. Obviously, there was much before that in terms of reductions, but in terms of the carbon piece, carbon neutral floors. And then last year we added our carbon neutral enterprise claim. That means everything you do with us is carbon neutral. And then our next step is very significant reductions that we'll need to make to meet our science-based targets, which are in 2030. And then 2040, we are looking to be carbon negative without the use of offsets. So with that, that's our presentation, and I would love to hear questions from the audience.
Thank you both. We do have one question in the queue. I don't know if you all see that. Considering Interface is a global company, how do you best estimate greenhouse gases associated with the use of solid products with so many different energy sources being used to generate electricity? Are you using national averages? What are you using?
Yeah, so we are a global company, and that comes with challenges, of course. We do use the EIA data specifically for our international energy mixes. So we are looking at a country-to-country basis and measuring those. And then within the US, where things are a little bit more granular, we can use the eGrid emission factors to do that.
And those are, I'm sorry, those are geographically specific as far as like where the product's coming from.
Yes, correct.
And we also use geographically specific energy grids for the use phase of the product, because our flooring, there's usually electricity used in the cleaning and maintenance of it through its lifetime. And so depending on the region, we tend to sell where we make. So products manufactured at our Australia factory are used in Australia. So we would use Australian energy data to model the effects of the use phase.
Great.
And so on and so forth for the different locations.
That's great. We do have a couple of other questions that popped up. Michael Oxman asked, what is the current proportion of emission reductions versus offsets? And do you have a projection for that for 2030?
Well, I think if we go back to, there was a slide that Connie popped up for a minute, and it showed that at least in our carpet manufacturing, we've reduced our greenhouse gas emissions, scope 1 and 2, that is, by 96% since 1996. So really significant progress there. And then our cradle to gate footprint. That's really a lot within the design and the product, and Connie can speak more to this, but that's been reduced by 76% since 1996.
Yeah, all of that reduction is is real reduction outside of offsets. All of that, those values are excluding the use of offsets.
Yeah.
Right. Do you have you tried to do a calculation on, okay, based on all the reductions we've done, made, then relative to what we've got left that we're having to use offsets for?
Well, yeah, that bottom, that last number, the current carbon footprint, that's what we've got to offset.
Gotcha.
Now,
Okay.
yeah, that's the part that we're offsetting. Yeah.
Great.
I think it was around.
So it'd be like
under
that
5,
24% that's remaining is what we have to offset. And of course, we're trying to drive that carbon footprint number down year on year so that there's less and less to offset.
Great. I have another question from Amy. Have you seen cost increases from shifting to recycled and or bio-based material inputs? And how have you mitigated or justified those cost increases?
Sometimes recycled and bio-based products are more expensive. Sometimes they are less expensive. It really just depends on the particular material. It's not, categorically, they're always more expensive. So it just depends. Now, when they are more expensive, we work really hard. Ray Anderson always, wanted us to look at the three-legged stool, and one of the legs of the stool is always cost, because if we go out of business, we're not going to be sustainable. So we really drive, when we have to put in a more expensive material, we find a way to reconstruct the product to maintain cost competitiveness. So yeah, it's a very critical part of making the progress, is not putting yourself out of business by making products that are too expensive.
Great.
It helps when, the mission of the company, we have a goal, and we have targets we have to meet, so we have to make these reductions. We have to just work really hard to find ways to do it and maintain profitability. That's where the magic is.
Yeah.
We have a question about your market-based scope 2, asking, have you considered RECs, renewable energy credits, or investing in on-site renewable generation to eliminate scope 2 emissions?
Yeah, so the number that you saw, that is our market base. We have invested in renewable energy certificates and a little bit of solar around the world where it makes sense. So what those remaining emissions come from our leased facilities, where those are kind of a scattering of various small offices and showrooms around the world that we haven't yet addressed. And additionally, we have some things that fall into scope 2 that aren't electricity, like steam processes at our rubber facilities. So we can't directly offset those with RECs. So that's where you're seeing a lot of that remaining, but that is significantly reduced from what it would be. And we are in fact 100% renewable electricity for all of our manufacturing through the use of investing in those tools.
Great. We have a question from Professor Marilyn Brown. What's the rationale for trying to move away from carbon offsets, especially if becoming regenerative is very pricey?
I think it's sort of philosophical in that we want to be a regenerative business. And so that's sort of what we see as the top of Mount Sustainability, as Ray would have put it, is to really be making a positive impact on the planet and be regenerative. So that, on top of just being able to continue to reduce as we see offset prices continue to increase. So that's going to be an increasingly expensive option. And just ensuring it is a lot of work to ensure that we're getting quality offsets. So I think as much as we can bring that internal so that we are truly becoming a regenerative business on our own, the more we want to do that.
I think
Yeah,
you
and
touched on.
I was going to say, I think that our use of offsets kind of sets itself up as kind of an internal carbon tax on us. So we are financially motivated to reduce our footprint so that we purchase less offsets. So we can invest in technologies and materials that bring our carbon footprint down, because now we're not going to have to purchase that quantity of offsets. So,
And I
good.
think you
Right.
referenced the carbon negative, sort of trying to sequester carbon in the production of your material, which I presume y'all are counting that as reductions in your scope 1 emissions, not an offset. It's part of making the product development itself sort of negative. Always question, is it negative or positive? It's good, but it's negative on the balance sheet, I guess.
Yeah,
when it comes
negative
to-
global warming potential.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So that comes into play in, the LCA piece, as Connie was talking about, our carbon negative carpet tiles, particularly the ones that are carbon negative from cradle to gate. So they're sequestering more than all of the rest that it takes to make that product. So with those, that's reducing our impacts, and meaning that we have less that we need to offset.
And then we have a question about science-based targets. I noted you had the Science-Based Targets Initiative specifically referenced as the third-party certification of your target, your SBTI or SPT. And so someone's just asking what you meant by a science-based target. Maybe you could just elaborate a little bit on that.
Yeah, sure. Happy to. So our approved science-based target is that we will reduce our scope 1 and 2 impacts by 50% by 2030, which, we were talking about earlier in terms of our scope 1 and 2 for carpet is already down 96%. So think about all that low hanging fruit is gone. We got to keep reducing. So that's going to be a big one for us. Also, we have targets around reducing our purchased goods and services by 50%. That was that biggest chunk of the pie that we have some amount of control over. And then we also set targets for our business travel and employee commuting to reduce those by 30%. And those weren't the biggest piece of the pie, but we really wanted to ensure that we were bringing our employees along on this mission in a way that they felt that they could contribute. So that's why we have additional goals around those pieces.
Yeah, and the Science-Based Target Initiative, you can look that up. That is the organization that reviewed our proposed targets and agreed that we had met the science-based approach, and to make significant reductions.
Right.
Making meaningful reductions, I guess.
In line with the Paris Agreement and 1.5 degree future. So, yeah.
Great. We had sort of a related to that, a question about what does a carbon negative company by 2040 look like? And maybe what is the role of bio-based materials play in that when you're looking at the cradle to cradle impact?
So we don't know, but we are working hard to figure it out. And yes, we do see bio-based and recycled materials as really important. Really getting off of virgin petrochemical and mined minerals completely is going to be required to achieve it. And we really don't. We have it's kind of like that moonshot mission that Ray gave us back in 1994 to Mission Zero and the top of Mount Sustainability. Now we have this new moonshot, and we don't really know how we're going to get there, but we are working really hard every day to figure it out.
Yep.
Great.
Yeah.
And I have another question from Blair Beasley about whether interface is considered technological sequestration for offsets, or do you just work with natural offsets?
I think that there are a lot of avenues we're considering for our offsets. I've been looking at the Oxford principles, which sort of shows you start with these reduction credits, then you move to more forest-based and forest-based removals, and then you can move towards those more expensive technological credits. So we're trying to move in line with that, just because there isn't a ton of opportunity to invest in those at this point. There are very much growing markets, but right now they're in their infancy. So we're waiting for those to be more available to us. But I think that that's part of our future for sure.
Great. Allison, I'm going to pass it over to you to continue with some of the questions.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, David. Yeah, we have another question from Jared on how do you become carbon negative without the use of offsets? I know you've already touched on this because you're trying to move away from using offsets, but what about this issue of using stored carbon from the source materials?
So what we did back several years ago, the R&T team got together and were challenged to say, could we make a product that was cradle to gate, that stored more carbon than it emitted? And it was a huge endeavor, and we created a prototype, but it was kind of like a concept car on the showroom. You couldn't really drive it off the lot. So then we had to develop an entire new supply chain. We had to develop new equipment and manufacturing technology to actually bring it into a reality. So what it basically is we dramatically reduced so that we only have a very small amount of materials that are virgin petrochemical or no virgin mine minerals, but a very small quantity of materials that have a positive carbon footprint that actually emit carbon. And the rest of the product, the balance of the product, is made up with recycled or bio-based materials that, on balance, when you sum the emissions and removals, GHG emissions and GHG removals, the removals outweigh the emissions. So that's how we create that carbon negative product. And there's no offsets involved in that. We do, in that a product like that's carbon negative cradle to gate, we still have to purchase offsets for downstream, the transport to our customers, the use stage through the life of the product, the end of life. So we have to buy offsets for that part of the life cycle. But for the cradle to gate, we don't have to purchase offsets. It just actually is a negative value.
Yeah, and I think to expand on that in terms of where we see that getting to carbon negative in the future is that's our carpet product. But we also do sell in other avenues, the resilient flooring and the rubber flooring. So we're looking at if there are ways that we can reduce those to that point and then integrate some of those bio materials or recycled materials to then bring that down. And when we talk about our overall carbon footprint and 85% of it coming from the products, if we can make it so that those products are carbon negative, then we're well on our way to being a carbon negative enterprise.
All right, great. I think that's kind of related to our next question. You've touched on how you had to sort of look at the whole supply chain to start these new products, to roll out these new products. And Felicia is asking, what was the biggest or some of the biggest wins over the last decade that allowed Interface to significantly reduce greenhouse gas emissions? And what do you see other companies across industries being able to take away and apply from what you've learned over time?
I would say that our biggest step changes on carbon footprint came from conversion to renewable energy. That's the first. Then dematerialization. Using less materials, we made a lot of great progress. Our products today weigh so much less than they did originally, and that means just using less stuff. So renewable energy, dematerialization, and then conversion to recycled products. Probably over half of our footprint reduction has come from recycled inputs, which have dramatically lower carbon footprints than their virgin counterparts. So those are the three big hits. Oh, well, maybe there's one more. Energy reduction. not just conversion to renewable, but we reduced our energy use in our factories by almost 50%, maybe a little more than that. But yeah, that certainly made renewable energy a lot more affordable when we use half as much energy as we used to. So those are the 4 big things. And it's great because those are 4 things any industry can do. It's not specific to interface.
All right. Well, we have another question on offsets. We have a lot of interest in your carbon offsets today. So we have a question from Paul. What are your carbon offsets and what % are technology based and which % are nature based? And do you have a preference? So where are you purchasing your carbon offsets?
Yeah, so we do disclose on an annual basis. You can actually go look up Interface. You can see all the projects that we do support on an annual basis. In terms of how we see the future, I mentioned that it's sort of in line with that Oxford principles. So we did start out with what was available back in 2005, which were the reduction credits that came from solar and wind. And we've seen that sort of evolve over time. So we still have some of those within our portfolio. We like to get a variety of different types, but we have evolved more into the nature-based space. And as I mentioned, we're looking to see where that evolves next, and that's hopefully into the removal space as those credits become more available.
All right, great. We have another question from Stephen on if you've experienced any negative responses to Interface's sustainability stance. For example, are there any customers who avoid you because of it, or how, and if so, how do you mitigate those kind of negative impressions of what you're doing?
I have certainly never encountered that. It's always been extremely well received. And it could be because of the space that we work in. The architecture and design community it's our audience, and they are all in on climate change. Years back, they were all in on environmental concerns. So we're lucky enough to have a customer base who is very interested in reduced environmental footprint. So we've been very well received. I guess that's probably not true for all industries, but I think it's becoming more expected in more industries than back in the 90s. Fortunately for us, the architecture and design community was interested, but today it's so much more common for a lot of industries. There's so much more attention to it and so much more consumer demand for action, I think.
Yeah, and I think it also maybe I'm reading into this question, but sometimes the concern is it more expensive because it's green, so I don't even want to engage. But that goes back to, I think, what Connie was saying about if this thing costs more, we got to figure out how to make it so that the rest don't cost as much so we can remain cost competitive. And to add to Connie's point, I do think, we have been lucky to be in this particular area, but I think this is applicable to others. But at least with architects, they want their buildings and their spaces to be there for many years, and they see it as part of their legacy. So as much as you can lean into the legacy of what someone else does, that motivates them to leave behind a better place, I think.
That's a great point. There's a lot of different reasons why people would be seeking out these kinds of sustainable solutions.
And certainly the recent developments from the SEC and focus on public companies having to report, climate change risk. I think that adds fuel to this good fire we're building.
Yes, definitely a lot of interest in the new SEC disclosures. So I'm surprised we haven't had a question specifically on that yet. But we do have another question on how you're thinking about issues beyond carbon. So general sustainability, maybe applying to biodiversity or assessing or mitigating physical climate risk. Anything that Interface is doing to address those kind of concerns?
Yeah, I will say that we do risk carbon focus, we're carbon tunnel vision. I think that's what it's called. And when you're so totally focused on one environmental impact, you might inadvertently do damage in other areas. And we recently did a study on the effect of this carbon focus of ours and looked at a range of the other environmental impacts that are measured using life cycle assessment. Some of those I mentioned in the presentation, like acid rain, smog, eutrophication, etc. And we did do an assessment to say, before this carbon focus, what was the product with the higher carbon footprint? What was the one with the lower carbon footprint? To see if any of those other impacts went up. And we were very happy to see that they did not with any significance. But that's very specific to our materials and our products, not across the board statement. And when it comes to biodiversity, it certainly is an area of increasing attention. And I do see that from the recent conference on biodiversity and declarations, that I think the number 3 contribution to loss of biodiversity is climate change. So certainly working in this area helps that area.
Yeah, and I think that Connie mentioned the mission earlier around climate take back, and also our new mission is around being the most sustainable company, and that's broader than just carbon. So I think there's increased attention on a lot of those areas, and we're looking to make progress in a lot of those areas, but we aren't ready to come out with metrics around those just yet. But we're starting to really delve into some of those.
Yeah, and we do continue to report out on a broad range of environmental impacts in our environmental product declarations for our products. It's not just carbon, it's everything else, not everything, but a lot of other impacts. And we, as Liz mentioned, and as you saw on one of our previous slides, we report on our lots of other metrics besides just carbon, the ones we were focused on today.
Yeah, like water and waste and recycled content are some of the key ones for us that we've had our eyes on for many, many years.
So it sounds like you're doing a lot of different types of reporting across the whole kind of ESG spectrum. We have another person wanting to know, what is your take on overall industry progress? And is there any cross-company collaboration that Interface engages in?
Yeah, we collaborate heavily with our supply chain. Many of our reductions and technological breakthroughs have come through collaboration with our suppliers. One of our biggest reductions has been in the impact of nylon yarns in our product, and that has come almost exclusively from work our suppliers have done. And we went to them and said, this is your footprint, and this is what you're doing to our footprint. And so they began to undertake projects and initiatives that generated some radical changes in their manufacturing, which trickled down into our product, reducing our footprint. So most of our collaboration has been upstream in our supply chain, although we do have recycling initiatives that we participate in across the flooring industry with flooring industry associations.
Yeah, and the other wonderful thing about collaborating with our suppliers is it doesn't just benefit us, but it benefits everyone that buys from them. So I think that a lot of competitors and a lot of other people in the textile space have benefited from the fact that we have really been advocating for reductions for many years.
Yeah, it's a great ripple effect.
Yeah.
That's encouraging to hear. I know those supply chain connections and agreements have taken off in a lot of different industries. Did you see those upstream changes because you were pushing for them and you had those conversations?
No, definitely. It's definitely because we were pushing them. And never bring it to us without us knocking on the door. And we actually not just look for innovation and footprint reductions. We start with asking for their carbon footprint data, because we need it to be able to accurately calculate our footprint. And when we don't have their data, then we use industry average or proxy data, and it's not very accurate. So our first step is always to go to our supplier and say, we need your life cycle assessment data. And they say, life cycle what? And so we go through the process of educating them on what it is and how to do it and how they can give us what we need. And then the next step is, now that we know your footprint, what can you do to reduce it? It's a long,
That's great
you have
to
to play the long game. It takes a while.
Yes, definitely, but step by step. Okay, we have another question on what is your priority between using bio-based material and recycled material? So how do you decide between the mixture of these materials, and is it more material durability, or is it certain characteristics you're looking for? Or is it always the carbon footprint?
So, first off, performance, whatever it is, it's got to perform adequately in the product. And then it's got to perform at cost, but our goal isn't to convert everything to recycled or convert everything to bio-based. Our goal is to get off virgin petrochemical materials, right? And so whatever path is the most expedient for performance and cost. So yeah, it goes both ways. We're not going to go to recycled and then go to bio-based. Our product at end of life, it's a complex, it's not going to be like composted in the end of life. So converting everything to bio-based for the idea that maybe it's all going to go to compost at the end of life it's not the path that we're on. And so there's no drive to go all bio. So yeah, it's both of them. Whatever it is it takes to get off virgin is really what's driving us.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that's, as Connie mentioned, a lot of work in the R&D space. Like our R&D team is always trying different formulations and different materials to find where that cost and performance and carbon reduction hopefully all end up in the right place.
Right, and our end of life strategy is recycling. So it doesn't, when you're going to recycle it, as long as whatever you put in, you're able to recycle it back into new product is also an important component.
Great. I feel like we're already touching on something related to the next question. You've mentioned a lot of different people, whether it's your research and development team or other people in the company, who it seems like everyone's kind of on board with this carbon reduction strategy, and everybody's kind of has their own way of whether it's doing the life cycle analysis or otherwise. And this question is related to something I was wondering as well about your workforce development. How I know Interface in particular transitioned to doing this carbon accounting a long time ago, but for companies just starting down this path, how do you get all of the company involved in this work, and how many people need to be helping out with this kind of effort? And this participant in particular in this webinar is asking for students looking to enter into a career in this area, are there any specific certifications you would recommend outside of LCA?
Well, I would say
I was going to lean on you, Connie,
Yeah.
to talk about our history of how we got to here, but
yeah, it's a long story, and but it was, employee engagement was just everything, and it was a huge investment and once the senior level management, once the owner of the company or the chairman of the board has an environmental epiphany and puts the company on a mission, now it's your job. It's your job to get there. So suddenly everybody, how does the person running this machine on the factory floor, how can they affect the mission? And that's what we did, was drive down to every group throughout the company. What's your part? How does what you do contribute to waste reduction, to energy savings, to et cetera? And that's the way everybody's engaged and connected to it. And the R&D teams, the global chemistry team, they really rock. That's what they spend their time doing 100% of the time. So they do get a lot of, they make a lot of the progress, and they get a lot of the credit as well, but it's across the company. Now, I will say that's the doing. The measuring is a whole separate thing, and a big complicated octopus itself that Liz is heavily invested in. So it's a big it's a big lift. People who can do those measuring, people who can do life cycle assessment, who can do carbon accounting, who can do ESG. Those are skills that someone can bring to the table.
Yeah, and in terms of certifications, there's certainly the certification mentioned around life cycle assessment. You can be
Yeah, an LCACP.
LCA practitioner, Connie.
Yeah,
right?
an LCACP. You can get that certification through the American Center for Life Cycle Assessment. So that's really useful if you want to get, jump right in, getting started into life cycle assessment.
And there are certifications around greenhouse gas accounting, but I haven't seen one that's sort of trickled to the top as the one that everyone should do. I personally came on at a time and learned by doing, because that was just the time frame that I joined during. And I think, at the right company, that's certainly possible in terms of doing that. It's just getting to the place. And I think, probably there's a good number of tech people on this call, given the origins. And certainly, finance, engineering, anyone who lives and loves data, you can learn how to do some greenhouse gas accounting.
All skills that are in demand these days. I think we are about out of time. I'm sorry, there are about 6 questions left. For anybody who didn't get your question answered, feel free to reach out and we can always be in touch in the future. But I will pass it over to David to wrap up our webinar. And I just want to extend a thank you to our guests. Thank you so much. I know I learned a lot and I really appreciate you joining us today.
Thank you. I always love to talk about what we do anytime.
Yeah, I just want to add my my thanks to Allison's for both of you spending the time with us, sharing not just the technical aspects of doing greenhouse gas accounting and life cycle assessment, but also the interface story and how that wove into the route towards using those tools effectively to get at where are those opportunities, and also like you sharing about the steps of converting to renewable energy, reducing energy use, dematerializing your product to the greatest extent possible, and ensuring that you're closing the loop on that material so that you're not using virgin material. How those basic strategies have really helped to drive your decarbonization efforts as you've moved forward. So thank you for sharing that perspective, and we are always pleased to have you all in front of our students and talking about career opportunities and certifications. So, and Liz, I just want to thank you again for participating in a panel a few months ago on that topic in particular. So you're always a good person to offer advice to students who are coming up. So thank you, and really appreciate it.
Yeah, great. Thanks for having us. I know Connie's battery died, but she would say thanks for having us too. So
great. Have a great afternoon, everybody.